I decided this would be a good time to pull together research I've done in the past on gatekeepers of history, particularly with regards to institutions in our world that have played a huge role in controlling the flow of information, not only by shaping the narrative, but also in hiding, suppressing, or destroying evidence for who and what was here previously and what happened to everything. My name is Michelle Gibson. I'm bringing this information about the gatekeepers of history forward for your consideration now in light of the very recent developments in Washington and the singling out of the Smithsonian Institution for review. And it will be interesting to see where this goes. So I'm going to start this video with the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian Institution was established in August of 1846 and was created by the United States government for the stated purpose of the increase and diffusion of knowledge. Nicknamed the nation's attic, it has an estimated 154 million items in its holdings across numerous facilities, and it's the largest such complex in the world. The Smithsonian Castle was the first building of the Smithsonian Institution, and said to have been built on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. between 1849 and 1855. We are told the brownstone for Smithsonian Castle, also known as Seneca Red Sandstone, and numerous buildings and canal locks in the area, came from a big stone quarry at the C&O Canal and Seneca Creek that started operating somewhere around 1781. This was notated as an 1898 photograph of the quarry. The Seneca Creek stone cutting mill at this location was said to have been built in 1868 and used to cut stone for Baltimore and Washington until 1901. Nowadays, the location designated as the former quarry is overgrown with sycamore trees, poplars, and dense brush, and is impenetrable most of the year. The Seneca Creek Aqueduct is near the location of the quarry and mill, and was said to have been built between 1829 and 1832 out of the Seneca Red Sandstone of the quarry, almost 40 years before the stone cutting mill was said to have opened. In West Virginia, US 219 was said to follow what was known as the Seneca Trail, a network of trails of unknown age used by indigenous Americans for commerce, trading, and communication. The Seneca Trail ran through the Appalachian Valley from what was to become Upper New York State and went well into Alabama, though they are described to us in our historical narrative strictly as footpaths. What we are told is that by the time the land was settled by Europeans starting in the 18th century, it was largely abandoned by its previous inhabitants. It is interesting to note that researchers have long suspected the Smithsonian to have played a role in the cover-up of giants. Back in the day, giant skeletons were displayed in public places and mentioned in newspaper articles, but all that went away. On the one hand, there are reports that the Smithsonian admitted to the destruction of thousands of giant human skeletons in the early 1900s as a result of a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, and on the other hand, there are fact-checkers vigorously debunking this as a satirical claim and false. The finding of giant human remains was well documented in the 19th century, and yet these days, the very existence of giants seems to be vigorously denied and or fact-checked as a hoax, when their remains turn up somewhere. This topic of where giant remains were found also ties into the location of infrastructure like S-shaped river bends, rail and canal, among other things, and there are also intriguing correlations between the locations of where some of these giant remains were found and Civil War battles and events. Yes, they were reported to be found at Mounds, but they were also randomly uncovered when people were digging. There are also conflicting beliefs expressed in existing documentation about whether or not these giants were advanced or primitive brutes. Either way, the existence of giants were pushed way back in time, with what happened to them being a mystery, though frequently with the conclusion that they were warring with each other and killed each other off. This newspaper clip about an almost 7-foot or 2-meter long skeleton of massive proportions was found 12 feet or almost 4 meters above a prehistoric mound that was ordered to be removed in a town just 4 miles or 6 kilometers west of Huntington, West Virginia. The article states at the end that the Smithsonian Institution will be notified of the discovery. Here's another publications clipping on the subject of giants, talking about the Great Lakes region It says, long before the Indians, it is believed to have been inhabited by a superior people, of whom not even a tradition remains, whose only monuments are earthworks and tumuli scattered here and there, in some places containing bones from men of gigantic size. It goes on to say further, mounds and relics from these mound builders were formerly abundant throughout the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, especially in this section. If a separate race from the Indians, when and by what agency they were destroyed will probably remain a mystery as deep as that of the lost island Atlantis. So this acknowledges the presence of giants here who were mound builders, but shrouds what happened to them in mystery, just like the lost Atlantis, saying we don't know who they were or really anything about them, except that they were a superior people. Creel Mound in South Charleston, West Virginia, is a short distance as the crow flies of 41 miles or 66 kilometers from Huntington. It was said to have been leveled in 1840 to create a judge's stand for horse races that were run around the base of the mound at the time. We are told it was excavated between 1883 and 1884, and that 13 skeletons were found altogether, with one of them being documented as having had a height of almost 7 feet or 2 meters. The Creel Mound is one of the few surviving mounds of the Kanawha Valley Mounds. The area extended along the upper terraces of the Kanawha River floodplain for 8 miles or 13 kilometers and consisted of 50 mounds and 8 to 10 circular earthworks, as reported by Cyrus Thomas, a prominent ethnologist of the late 19th century employed by the Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of Ethnology, best known for his work on American mounds. Along with the tallest skeleton by far being 18 feet or 5.5 meters tall at West Hickory in Pennsylvania, which I will talk about shortly, of the 10 featured on this graphic, 3 are generally located in the vicinity of Huntington, West Virginia. Number 10 on the list was found at the Great Serpent Mound at 7 feet or a little over 2 meters tall, number 9 at Cresap Mound in West Virginia at 7 feet 2 inches, still a little over 2 meters tall, and number 6 at Miamisburg, Ohio at a little over 8 feet or 2.5 meters tall. The Great Serpent Mound is only a distance of 63 miles or 102 kilometers northwest of Huntington. Numerous historical giant skeletons have been found in the area around Serpent Mound. Number 6 of the top 10 giant discoveries in North America was found in Miamisburg, Ohio, near the Miamisburg Mound, which is 70 miles or 113 kilometers from the Great Serpent Mound in Peebles, Ohio. The Miamisburg Mound is located next to the S-shaped Great Miami River. The Miamisburg Mound is the largest conical-shaped earthwork of its kind in the United States. Silbury Hill, located near the Avebury megalithic complex in Wiltshire in England, is similar in appearance to the Miamisburg Mound and is the largest mound of its kind in Europe. Number 9 on the top 10 list in North America was documented to have been found in 1959 by Dr. Donald Dragoo, the curator for the section of man at the Carnegie Museum of Pittsburgh at Cresap Mound in West Virginia, at 7 feet 2 inches, still a little over 2 meters tall. Yet academia still persists in the debunking of the presence of giant humans here. The Grave Creek Mound is considered to be one of the largest conical mounds in the United States and first excavated by amateurs in 1838, at which time giant skeletons reported to be as long as 8 feet, or almost 2.5 meters tall, were uncovered, but not listed on the top 10 giants discovered in North America for some reason. The Grave Creek Mound just so happens to be smack dab across the street from the West Virginia Penitentiary. If you are interested in going for a visit, the West Virginia Penitentiary was said to have been built in 1866, 1 year after the end of the American Civil War, and was decommissioned in 1995. The location offers prison tours from April to November every year, and paranormal investigations take place here because of its haunted reputation. The Grave Creek Stone is called West Virginia's most controversial archaeological relic. It was discovered when the Grave Creek Mound was first excavated in 1838. Initially it was believed to be some kind of Indian hieroglyph, but different scholars of the day concluded the characters on the stone resembled a variety of ancient alphabets, including but not limited to that of Celtic, Tunisian, Egyptian, and Etruscan. Other scholars dismissed the Grave Creek Stone as a fraud. The Smithsonian is said to have 4 casts of the stone, but the location of the original is said to be unknown. The characters of the Grave Creek stone bring to mind those on the Heavener rune stone in east-central Oklahoma, which have been mostly attributed to being the Norse runes of Vikings that found their way there long ago. Same thing for the appearance of Old South Arabian, like the inscription found in southern Yemen on the left, compared with Norse runes on the right. What if these runes were actually the runes of Vril, or life force, pictured on the bottom middle, that was connected to the ancient humans and their mastery of how to harness natural energy to create amazing things? Giant skeletons have also been uncovered in the desert sands of southern Arabia in the process of looking for gas and oil, but like everywhere else these days, discoveries like this have been labeled as hoaxes. Back in West Virginia in 1857, the almost 11-foot skeleton of a giant was found in the vineyard of the sheriff in East Wheeling and was on display there for an unknown period of time. Looks like the giant skeleton was parked outside of a store in Wheeling, displaying an array of skulls and bones. Now I'm going to turn my attention to West Hickory in Pennsylvania, where the tallest recorded skeleton in North America was found at 18 feet or 5.5 meters. This article was from the Oil City Times, from the Marysville Tribune of Marysville, Ohio, dated January 26th of 1870. At the top of the article, it referenced the Cardiff giant outdone and the alleged discovery of the skeleton of a giant in the oil regions. So I looked up the Cardiff giant to find out more about it. What has come down to us in our historical narrative about the Cardiff giant was that it was one of the most famous archaeological hoaxes of all time. In October of 1869 in Cardiff, New York, workers digging a well behind the barn of William Stubb Newell uncovered a 10-foot or almost 3-meter tall, 3,000-pound or 1,371-kilogram petrified giant man. Subsequently, Newell covered the giant with a tent and turned it into a local attraction, drawing a lot of attention from visitors. This is the story we've been told to explain the Cardiff giant's existence. The hoax was said to have been perpetrated by a New York tobacconist named George Hull, who wanted to fool people as to how easy it would be to create a giant. The narrative says that in 1868, only 3 years after the end of the American Civil War, Hull hired men to quarry a ginormous block of gypsum from Fort Dodge, Iowa, and had it shipped to Chicago to have it sculpted into a giant. Then Hull had it shipped to the farm of his cousin, William Newell, in New York in November of 1868, where it was buried in a hole. Then, after almost a year had passed, Newell hired the men to dig the well where they found the giant. The Cardiff giant in short time was sold to a syndicate who moved it to Syracuse, New York for exhibition. The Cardiff giant garnered a lot of attention, including that of experts, as well as of P.T. Barnum, who was said to have hired a man covertly to model the giant's shape in wax in order to make a plaster replica of it after his offer to buy the giant was refused. P.T. Barnum was a showman, businessman, and politician who got his start in the dime museum business in 1841. Dime museums were most popular in the United States at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century as institutions which provided cheap entertainment for working class people, and reached their peak in popularity in the time period between 1890 and 1920, declining in popularity with the rise of vaudeville and the film industry. Barnum's American Museum in Manhattan's financial district was known for its strange attractions and performances. The attractions were a combination of zoo, museum, lecture hall, wax museum, theater, and freak show. Barnum's American Museum became a central location in the development of American popular culture and was filled with things like dioramas, scientific instruments, modern appliances, a flea circus, the Fiji mermaid, Siamese twins, and other human curiosities. At any rate, P.T. Barnum was said to have exhibited his plaster giant as the real giant and the Cardiff giant as the fake. Then, by December of 1869, the Cardiff giant was said to have been exposed as a fraud, and Hull confessed everything to the press, and that by February of 1870, both the Cardiff giant and Barnum's giant had been revealed as fakes in court. The Cardiff giant, and what we are told was the unauthorized copy of it made by P.T. Barnum, are on display at Marvin's Marvelous Mechanical Museum in Farmington Hills, Michigan. But what if both the Cardiff giant and Barnum's giant were actually real giants, and not hoaxes, as we are told after all? The tobacconist George Hull as a hoaxer story gets even stranger. The solid Muldoon was another petrified giant human body that was unearthed in Beulah, Colorado, and later called a hoax perpetrated by the same guy, George Hull. The solid Muldoon, at over 7 feet or 2 meters long, was said to have been discovered near Mace's Hole in Beulah, Colorado in 1877, 3 months after Hull created it, this time from mortar, rock, dust, clay, plaster, ground bones, blood, and meat, and kiln fired it before it was buried in the location it was discovered 3 months later. The solid Muldoon went on display in Colorado and New York before revealed as a hoax to the New York Times. So now let's see what the 1870 newspaper article has to say with regards to the giant that was found at West Hickory. 2 men excavating near West Hickory in preparation for erecting a derrick first exhumed an enormous rusty helmet of iron, and then they unearthed a 9-foot or almost 3-meter long sword. So they made the hole bigger and soon came upon the bones of 2 enormous feet. After a few hours they unearthed the well-preserved skeleton of an enormous human. The bones of the skeleton were described as remarkably white, the double teeth all in place, of extraordinary size, and that when the giant was alive he must have stood 18 feet or 5.5 meters in his stockings. And lastly, the bones were found about 12 feet or 3.5 meters below the surface of a mound, and the mound was not more than 3 feet or less than a meter above the level of the ground around it, and the article ended with, "Here is another nut for antiquarians to crack." Firstly, to put that into perspective, this garage has 12-foot walls, so the giant's bones were found that far below the surface of a mound, which was another 3 feet higher than the ground. Secondly, antiquarians are those who study history with a particular attention to artifacts, archaeological and historic sites, and historic archives and manuscripts. The American Antiquarian Society was established in 1815, said to be a national research library of pre-20th century American history and culture, and the oldest historical society with a national focus, having been founded in 1812. Its stated mission was to collect, preserve, and make available for study all printed records of what is known as the United States of America. Seems like the American Antiquarian Society was established to be a gatekeeper for the new official history, like the aforementioned Smithsonian Institution was to become. Somehow I don't think the self-described antiquarians had any intention of cracking the nut. The seal of the American Antiquarian Society translates from the Latin of Ovid's Metamorphoses, Book 15, line 872. "Now I have completed my work, which neither sword nor devouring time will be able to destroy," complete with an illustration of what we have come to consider Greco-Roman architecture and a broken Corinthian pillar at the feet of what appears to be an angel. The view of the Philadelphia Museum of Art from the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia is pictured on the right. West Hickory just happens to be located geographically only 14 miles or 23 kilometers southeast of Titusville. Titusville is noteworthy because it was where the petroleum industry in the United States began in earnest in 1859 when Edwin Drake found oil on a piece of leased land near Titusville in what is now called Oil Creek State Park. For this reason, Titusville is called the birthplace of the oil industry, and for a number of years this part of Pennsylvania was the leading oil-producing region in the world. Today, the Oil Creek State Park Trail runs on the bed of the first railroad line to reach Titusville, the Oil Creek Railroad. Then there is Giant City State Park in Makanda, Illinois. Giant City State Park in the Shawnee National Forest is located just south of Carbondale in southern Illinois. Carbondale was the crossing point of the paths of totality for both the 2017 and 2024 solar eclipses, locations where the moon's shadow completely covers the sun, and this part of southern Illinois was and is point of greatest eclipse duration, where the shadow of the moon from the eclipse of the sun lasts the longest. So it looks like whoever built this ancient advanced civilization knew exactly where they were in time and place, both astronomically and terrestrially. During the American Civil War, the Confederate Army was said to have constructed a fort in Columbus, Kentucky, at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, very close to Cairo and Carbondale, in a part of Illinois nicknamed Little Egypt. Today, Cairo in Illinois is empty and deserted, and considered a ghost town. In its heyday, Cairo, located right at the confluence of these two great rivers, was an important city along the steamboat routes and railway lines. Back in 1861, the Confederacy lost the state of Kentucky, which had wanted to remain neutral until a Confederate army occupied Columbus, Kentucky, which was supported by President Jefferson Davis, and Kentucky requested aid from the Union. A primary attraction at the Columbus-Belmont State Park, the historical location of that fort, are the remains of a mile-long giant chain, and its anchor estimated to weigh between 4 to 6 tons. The giant chain was said to have been constructed under the direction of Confederate General Leonidas Polk, who in 1861 had it stretched across the Mississippi River between the fortification in Columbus and Camp Johnson in Belmont, Missouri. But apparently this defensive strategy didn't work too well, as Union troops under then Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant occupied the area and took down most of the chain. So exactly how do you go about hiding giants and their advanced civilization? Based on the information I provided in this video and past research, I think the American Civil War was another one of the many ways this was done and was not what we are told about it. In this example of finding correlations between giants and Civil War battles, this article on the bones of giant Indians near Antietam Creek is on the Library of Congress website, titled Bones of Giant Indians, about giant skeletons found in Antietam, Maryland. It was originally published on February 9th of 1898 in the Juniata Sentinel and Republican newspaper in Mifflintown in Juniata County, Pennsylvania. This article implies that the skeletons were found of 7 feet in height and were those of Indians that roamed over the state of Maryland in their wildness, armed with instruments that either nature gave them or in their limited skill to make. It further goes on to say that the locality from where these skeletons came, near Antietam Creek in Frederick County, was supposed to have been the battleground of 2 tribes of Indians, the Catawbas and the Delawares. According to this claim, some Catawbas overtook a band of Delawares living at the mouth of the Antietam and annihilated them, but the president of the Maryland Academy of Sciences and provost of the Peabody Institute, after a careful review of the locality, found that there was no evidence to support this claim of a battle, other than some spears and arrowheads found there. This location of Antietam Creek and the alleged battleground between the 2 Indian tribes would not have been far in distance from the location of the Battle of Antietam, the deadliest one-day battle in American military history, on September 17th of 1862, with 22,727 dead, wounded, or missing. We are told that after a long bloody day of fighting and death, the Union Army succeeded in turning back the Confederate invasion of Maryland, and was considered a major turning point in the war in the Union's favor. So exactly how was the president of the Maryland Academy of Sciences supposed to find evidence of an historical battle between giant Indians in a place with an even more recent battle, and of this magnitude? The Peabody Institute mentioned in this article immediately caught my attention. In 1857, banker, and also called the father of modern philanthropy, George Peabody, established the Peabody Institute in Baltimore with a bequest of at least $800,000, and it is the oldest conservatory in the United States. By the time it was completed and opened in 1866, 1 year after the official end of the American Civil War, it was dedicated by George Peabody himself and included a music academy, library, and art gallery. That entrance at the east wing of the George Peabody Library sure looks proportionally like it's made for much bigger people than we are today. Next, Bell Systems got its start in 1877 when the first telephone exchange opened in New Haven, Connecticut, and we are told named after Alexander Graham Bell, who was credited with patenting the first telephone and was one of the co-founders of AT&T in 1885, along with his father-in-law, Gardner Green Hubbard. In addition, both of these men were heavily involved with the founding of the National Geographic Society in January of 1888, which we are told began as an elite club for academics and wealthy patrons for the purpose of the increase and diffusion of geographical knowledge. The Bell Labs complex in Holmdel, New Jersey, was where researchers like Carl Jansky were credited with the discovery of radio waves coming from the galactic center and the development of radio astronomy. The Holmdel complex, in use by Bell Labs for approximately 44 years starting from around 1962, was called the biggest mirror ever and located near the entrance to Lower New York Bay. Today, it is a mixed-use office for high-tech startup companies, but it started out as a research and development facility for Bell Systems, which became Bell Labs, and the workplace for 6,000 engineers and researchers. I believe that those behind the reset of Earth's history and the New World Order deliberately caused a cataclysm via directed energy into the grid system relatively recently, which devastated the surface of the Earth, simultaneously causing the land to undulate and buckle, causing, among other things, swamps, bogs, deserts, dunes, and whole land masses to shear off and submerge under seas and oceans, and that the European colonizers we learn about in our history were exploring and claiming the land of a post-cataclysmic world. A sudden cataclysmic event, creating swamps, deserts, and even submerging entire land masses around the Earth, would account for how a highly advanced worldwide civilization of giants could be wiped from the face of the Earth and erased from our collective memory. Secondly, I believe the beings behind the cataclysm were shovel-ready to dig enough of the original infrastructure out of the ruined Earth so they could be used and civilization restarted, which I think started in earnest in the mid to late 1700s and early 1800s. Then they only used the pre-existing infrastructure until they found replacement fuel sources that could be monetized and controlled by them for what had originally been a free energy power grid and transportation system worldwide, and when what remained of the original infrastructure was no longer useful to them or inconvenient to their agenda, they had it destroyed, discontinued, or abandoned, typically in a very short time after it was said to have been constructed. I think there was a hostile takeover of the Earth and its grid system, which was reverse engineered as a mind control and energy harvesting system. We have been indoctrinated into our present belief systems through our educational systems and cultural offerings, which has reinforced the indoctrination through programming in things like movies, television, art, literature, and music. I believe that these beings with a negative agenda devised a complicated plan to knock humanity off the positive Moorish timeline of higher consciousness in an interdimensional war in order to control humanity, using humans as their tools against the Creator and creation. I bring all this up because it is important to know this is what's been going on here. Humans are inherently sovereign beings. They have gone to all of this trouble because, by universal law, they can't lay a finger on us. They have tricked us into accepting their sovereignty over our own. But they have to tell us what they are doing, so they have our consent. So they choose avenues like movies, literature, art, and music to tell us without telling us they are telling us, and if we don't get it and object collectively, then they technically have our tacit consent, even if we don't know we are being told something, and that is what they are counting on. So let's look at some examples from public art. Firstly, there are two identical sculptures entitled The Awakening. They are of a 72-foot or 22-meter statue that depicts a giant embedded in the earth struggling to free himself. One is at National Harbor in Oxon Hill, Maryland. They consist of 5 aluminum pieces buried in the ground in such a way that it gives the impression of a distressed giant attempting to free himself from the ground, with mouth in mid-scream as the giant struggles to emerge from the earth. There is an identical sculpture in Chesterfield, Missouri. I find it interesting to note that the head of the giant in these awakening sculptures, with the mouth in mid-scream on the left, looks very much like the mouth and the head of this giant skeleton that was uncovered in Adams County, Ohio, near the Great Serpent Mound on the right. Secondly, here are some examples of sculptures around London, also very reminiscent of the two awakening sculptures of buried giants, or giants attempting to free themselves from the ground. They are putting these sculptures in public places where people can interact with them and accept them as art without realizing that they might be communicating to us something that has been very well hidden about the world we are living in. I don't believe the giants were hoaxes. I believe the hoax is on us to hide their very existence from us, especially from not that long ago. The controllers have always feared the Great Awakening of humanity, and thus threw everything they could at us to prevent it from happening and keep us asleep so we would never know what hit us. But no matter what they do, they can't keep it from happening. Among many other things, they lost control of the narrative, no matter how hard they try to get it back.